Out of all the rivalries in Dexter, none hit harder than Dexter Morgan versus Sergeant James Doakes, two predators on opposite sides of the law. One hunts evil, the other hides behind justice. They share the same instincts, the same darkness, but only one truly understands how to control it. Today we're breaking down why this matchup is one of the most fascinating duels in television history, and more importantly, why in the end it really wasn't even close. Before we talk about Dexter, we have to give Doakes his due. Sergeant James Doakes is often remembered for his volcanic temper and those now iconic outbursts. But underneath the constant swearing and eye rolls, Doakes was a man of principle, a decorated Army Ranger trained in Black Ops, fluent in multiple languages, and a man who had seen violence in its rawest form. In many ways, his time in the military forged him into something more than just a cop. He became the kind of man who could smell danger before it showed up. When Doakes transferred to Miami Metro Homicide, he brought that battlefield intuition with him. He didn't just profile criminals, he sensed them. That's why, from nearly the first episode, he immediately felt something off about Dexter. While others at the station saw Dexter as shy, helpful, and socially awkward, Doakes saw the darkness behind the smile. To him, Dexter's politeness wasn't endearing, it was camouflage. That sixth sense came from experience. Doakes had seen monsters before, men who hid bloodlust behind discipline. To him, Dexter fit that mold perfectly. Every controlled answer, every lack of emotion, every clinical fascination with the dead, it all screamed predator. Doakes might not have had proof, but he didn't need it, not at first. Instinct was enough. And that's the thing about Doakes. His instincts were rarely wrong. They kept him alive overseas, they exposed crooked cops in Miami, and they put him directly onto Dexter's trail. It's easy to underestimate how perceptive he really was because the show plays him like the angry foil. But in reality, Doakes was the only person at Miami Metro who ever saw Dexter clearly, long before anyone else even suspected he was hiding something. Dexter Morgan is almost the antithesis of Doakes. Where Doakes operates on muscle memory and gut reactions, Dexter is defined by structure and calculation. His entire life is built around control, containing his dark passenger, maintaining his image, and sticking to the code of Harry. Harry Morgan, Dexter's adoptive father, realized early on that his son wasn't like other boys. Dexter didn't feel empathy, didn't show remorse, and displayed violent impulses even as a child. Instead of letting that chaos destroy him, Harry gave him the code, a strict set of moral guidelines that let Dexter channel his killing urges toward those who deserved it: murderers, rapists, predators, people who had already taken life unjustly. That code made Dexter lethal, but disciplined. It gave him purpose. It also made him exceptionally good at hiding in plain sight. As a blood spatter analyst, he lived inside the system, studying how killers made mistakes so that he could avoid them himself. He refined forensics into armor, psychology into disguise, and clean habits into ritual. Dexter's genius wasn't just about killing, it was about not getting caught. Every movement, every alias, every hour logged in the lab, all of it built to maintain a facade that even trained investigators couldn't penetrate, except one. Doakes saw through that mask, and that's what made him so dangerous. In the early days at Miami Metro, their rivalry was more Cold War than full-blown conflict. Doakes glared across the bullpen while Dexter deflected with quiet smirks and false charm. But as the ice truck killer case intensified, Doakes started connecting dots. Dexter's obsession with crime scenes, his impossible calm, his lack of human reaction to brutality. For a cop like Doakes, that was suspicious enough to justify surveillance, and for Dexter, it was the first real test of his double life. Season by season, that tension simmered until it erupted. By the time Doakes discovered Dexter's blood slide collection, the literal trophies of his kills, it was no longer suspicion, it was confirmation. And in that moment, both hunters knew exactly what the other was. From there, it stopped being a cat and mouse game and became a war. When you take away the knives, the forensics, and the training, what's left between these two men is a battle of psychology. Doakes' mindset is operating by feel and conviction. He trusts his gut absolutely and thrives in chaos. His strategy is short-term, direct, and personal. He goes after the threat head-on because that's how he deals with danger. Dexter's mindset is cold, methodical, and predictive. He plans 10 steps ahead, mapping behavior patterns, timelines, and likely outcomes before making his move. He sees the world like a crime scene. Evidence, angles, patterns, and probabilities. Their clash is almost chemical. Doakes reacts where Dexter calculates. That's not to say Doakes was reckless. He wasn't. But the same intensity that made him fearless also made him predictable. Dexter, reading him like one of his victims, used that against him. By the time Doakes started tailing Dexter full-time, Dexter was already manipulating him, feeding him selective information, controlling his exposure, and anticipating every move. In a way, Dexter didn't just outsmart Doakes, he studied him. Doakes underestimated how long Dexter had been doing that to people, how well he understood the human psyche, and how easy it was for him to turn suspicion into obsession. When analyzing this showdown, you have to separate two different battlegrounds: physical ability and tactical control. Physically, Doakes has the edge. He He's an ex-ranger, trained in close-quarters combat, weapons, and survival. There's no scenario where Dexter outmuscles him in a straight-up fight. In fact, even Dexter admits it. If Doakes ever caught him completely off guard, it could end badly. But that's the thing. Dexter never lets himself get caught off guard. Dexter's survival depends on preparation. Every kill ritual involves sedation, controlled surroundings, and environmental dominance. He doesn't fight fair because he doesn't need to. If you're on Dexter's table, you're there because he already won. In contrast, Doakes thrives in confrontation. He's the type to kick down a door, lead from the front, and chase danger head-on. His combat reflexes are precise, but they rely on knowing his enemy's location and objective. Dexter doesn't give either. Think of it like chess versus boxing. Doakes will always land the harder punch rack, but Dexter's the one already thinking 6 moves ahead, positioning every piece before the first hit is even thrown. Once Doakes finds out who Dexter really is, the balance should theoretically flip. He has the moral high ground, the evidence, and the motivation. But Dexter's genius lies in manipulation. Even when trapped, he finds control. When Doakes captures Dexter in the Everglades cabin, it's a remarkable role reversal. Predator becomes prey. But even then, Dexter doesn't panic. He observes. He studies Doakes' demeanor, tests his reactions, and gauges how far he's willing to bend the law to stop him. Doakes, despite his training, still believes in the system. That's his weakness. He has to bring Dexter in alive. He has to prove it. Because in Doakes' world, justice needs a badge. In Dexter's world, justice needs a knife. That simple difference determines everything that happens next. Doakes wastes time trying to bring evidence, coordinate backup, and follow procedure. Dexter uses that time to study his environment, assess reagents on the shelves, and find his opening. When Lila eventually blows up the cabin, killing Doakes and freeing Dexter from suspicion, it's almost poetic. Doakes loses not because he was weak, but because he was honorable. His moral compass made him predictable. Dexter's lack of one made him unstoppable. If Harry Morgan's code defined Dexter, then James Doakes' creed defined him. Protect and serve no matter the cost. Both men operate by deeply ingrained internal rules. The difference is in how flexible those rules are under pressure. Harry's code taught Dexter to adapt, how to improvise, deceive, and survive while staying within his ethical bounds. The code bends strategically when Dexter needs it to, as seen throughout the series when he manipulates its wording to justify specific kills. Doakes' creed, however, is unwavering. He doesn't lie to manipulate. He doesn't scheme. He does what's right, even when it costs him his career. That rigidity makes him a great cop, but a terrible chess player against someone like Dexter. Because every time Dexter shifts his tactics, Doakes has to adjust within the confines of his moral framework. He's fighting 2 wars at once, one against Dexter and one against his own principles. And in that conflict, Dexter wins by default. Part of what makes this rivalry so compelling is that at a fundamental level, Dexter and Doakes are too similar. Both are driven by inner compulsions they can't fully control. Both isolate themselves from their co-workers. Both view justice through a personal lens. The key difference is that Dexter learned to mask his darkness. Doakes never did. Doakes wears his aggression on his sleeve. The shouting, the temper, the confrontations, they're all expressions of a barely contained inner fury. In many ways, he's the emotional version of what Dexter is psychologically. And that's exactly why Doakes hates him so much. Dexter represents the part of him that he can't control, cold, detached, and capable of horrifying things, yet somehow accepted by everyone else. That irony runs deep. Doakes fights monsters for a living, but ends up chasing a mirror image of his own suppressed rage. Dexter's mask, meanwhile, hides something Doakes can sense but can't articulate, which fuels his obsession. In narrative terms, Doakes isn't just Dexter's rival, he's his reflection. The soldier who follows orders versus the killer who writes his own. If we treat this as an even matchup, equal terrain, equal awareness, the outcome still tilts toward Dexter for 5 key tactical reasons. Number 1, environmental awareness. Dexter never enters a space unprepared. He studies layouts, lighting, exits, and potential traps. Doakes, driven by adrenaline, engages on instinct, often entering unknown settings at a disadvantage. Number 2, forensic precision. Dexter understands crime scenes better than anyone. That knowledge means he can anticipate what evidence Doakes would look for and how to deny it to him. Number 3, mental endurance. Dexter controls his pulse, breathing, and emotional state, even under duress. Doakes' baseline aggression raises his heart rate and narrows his focus, making him more vulnerable in psychological contests. Number 4, manipulative strategy. Dexter blends empathy and deception seamlessly. When dealing with people like LaGuerta, Rita, or Masuka, he adapts perfectly to what they need emotionally. unfortunately. Doakes never learned to do that. His honesty isolates him. And number 5, preparation time equals victory. If Dexter has even 24 hours to plan, the fight is over before it begins. Of course, in close combat, Doakes is the superior fighter, but hand-to-hand fights aren't Dexter's style, and that's the point. He'd never engage unless he controlled every variable. Both characters represent distorted forms of justice. Dexter's code is a logical framework for an illogical urge. It gives him purpose and masks his compulsion in morality. Doakes' sense of justice is rooted in real morality, but it's undercut by uncontrollable emotion. When you align those axes, control versus emotion, Dexter always wins. His moral code, though twisted, creates order. Doakes' moral compass, though righteous, creates chaos. Doakes' death, then, wasn't just a narrative necessity, it was symbolic. The soldier who fights by the rules lost it to the killer who redefined them. But here's the nuance that keeps fans fascinated. Doakes was right. Everything he said about Dexter was true. He saw through him before anyone else, and he even managed to corner him physically. The tragedy is that being right wasn't enough. The world was designed to protect Dexter, the evidence, the timing, even Lila's intervention. In another world, with slightly different circumstances, maybe Doakes would have been the one standing over Dexter's corpse instead. After Doakes' death, Dexter's reflections show rare traces of regard, even sorrow. He didn't hate Doakes, he respected him. In Dexter's mind, Doakes represented a pure form of opposition, relentless, incorruptible, and honest. He wasn't a corrupt cop or a killer hiding behind justification. He was just a man doing what he believed was right. That's why Dexter never truly celebrates Doakes' death. Even years later in Dexter, New Blood, you can still sense the echo of that guilt, the recognition that Doakes was the one guy who got it right. In a twisted way, killing Doakes destroyed some of Dexter's own illusions about the code. It forced him to ask whether controlling his darkness truly made him better or just luckier. Let's explore the hypothetical, because this question defines the what-if fans never stop asking. If Doakes had survived the explosion and escaped custody, how would the rematch have gone? Could he have actually beaten Dexter? Realistically, it depends on context. In a direct pursuit, Doakes would keep pressing until Dexter slipped. But Dexter doesn't slip, he adapts. Doakes may have had moral resolve, but Dexter's lack of empathy means he never hesitates. The first hesitation on Doakes' end, whether to call backup, whether to justify a kill, would cost him the match. That said, Doakes would force Dexter into discomfort. He'd push him psychologically, expose him publicly, and strip away his confidence piece by piece. In a drawn-out confrontation, say, across multiple sting attempts or investigations, Doakes might actually corner him. If Miami Metro ever took Doakes seriously before the explosion, Dexter's downfall could have looked very different. It's a rare matchup where both sides are simultaneously unbeatable in different arenas, Doakes in open confrontation, Dexter in deception. But when both those skill sets collide, deception almost always wins. There's another layer to this showdown that's easy to overlook. Doakes is the moral check that defines the boundaries of Dexter's world. He's not just a rival, he's the manifestation of consequence. Every time Dexter lies, manipulates, or kills, Doakes is the embodiment of what's waiting if he's ever truly seen. Their conflict explores a fundamental question. What separates a hero from a monster when both hunt evil? In military terms, Doakes is the knife you wear openly, a weapon of righteous defense. Dexter is the knife you hide under the table, a silent, surgical tool used when the system fails. Both justify their violence, but only Dexter divorces it from morality entirely. That's why this fight resonates beyond action. It's philosophical. It's about control versus conscience. And in the world of predators, control always wins. Why isn't it close? Because even though Doakes is stronger, more experienced, and just as intuitive, Dexter fights by different physics. Dexter turns morality into math. He calculates, isolates, and executes with the precision of a surgeon. Doakes, no matter how sharp his instincts, is still playing by a human rulebook. That's the ultimate mismatch. Humanity versus pathology. Dexter's ability to function without empathy gives him a kind of superpower in this context. He can process data, act instantly, and compartmentalize emotion. Doakes can't because his empathy, however buried under rage, is still there. That empathy makes him human, and being human is a liability against someone who isn't. In the end, Dexter didn't overpower Doakes, he simply played a longer game. He outweighted him, outplanned him, and let the world tilt in his favor. It wasn't fair, but it was inevitable. Doakes' death didn't just remove Dexter's biggest threat, it created a void. Every major antagonist that came after, the Miguel Prados, the Trinities, even Sergeant Logan in New Blood, echoed pieces of Doakes' dynamic with Dexter, but none ever replaced him. Why? Because Doakes represented something unique, the version of Dexter that could have been if Harry had pointed him toward the light instead of the shadows. A man who fights monsters but refuses to become one. Without Doakes, Dexter loses his check. He becomes untethered, chasing chaos under the guise of order. That's why when Doakes dies, the series itself shifts tone, from concealed tension to exposed guilt. Even though Doakes lost, thematically, he wins. His very existence defines Dexter's weakness, the need to hide. And in that sense, his spirit haunts Dexter far longer than his body ever could. Let's imagine a perfect standoff. Doakes versus Dexter, no traps, no drugs, no backup, just two men in a warehouse. Doakes brings raw aggression, combat training, and superior speed. Dexter brings precision and the ability to anticipate movement. In an immediate brawl, Doakes dominates. His training in Krav Maga and close quarters combat ensures that. Yet as soon as the fight shifts from muscle to strategy, Dexter's brain takes control. He'd use the environment, chords, angles, visibility, to manipulate Doakes' attention. He wouldn't try to win the fight directly. He'd work to create an opening for a sedative, a chokehold, or an improvised weapon. In series canon, Dexter overpowers men much larger than himself, Ray Speltzer, for instance, but only because he controls the context. Against Doakes, that same precision ensures that even in a stand-up confrontation, Dexter's survival instinct pushes him past fear. The result? Doakes might win the first round, but Dexter always wins the last one. Ultimately, Dexter versus Doakes isn't even close. Not because Doakes wasn't capable, but because they're playing two different games. Doakes is a soldier bound by a system. Dexter is a predator designed to exploit it. Doakes needed permission to act. Dexter creates permission. Doakes was bound by justice. Dexter is the justice he enacts. Even if Doakes managed to arrest Dexter, there's no world where the evidence would stick long term. Dexter's entire life is built to vanish under scrutiny. He has falsified documents, stolen lab samples, faked fingerprints, and even manipulated crime scenes in plain sight. Doakes' only hope was exposure, and exposure ended the moment he was trapped alongside Dexter. Because in Dexter's world, knowledge of his secret isn't power, it's a death sentence. Doakes remains the greatest what-if in Dexter. He's the only man who truly cornered the monster, and that makes him immortal in the story's mythology. Even New Blood alludes to his shadow. The show's repeated callbacks to confrontation, accountability, and exposure all trace back to what started with Doakes. He isn't just Dexter's rival, he's the standard for every pursuer who came after. That's why fans still argue about who would win in a rematch. Because despite all the evidence that Dexter holds the upper hand, Doakes represents something deeper, the part of the audience that wants there to be justice. We root for Dexter, but we respect Doakes. Maybe we even need Doakes to remind us that the system isn't supposed to let people like Dexter win. But in the world Dexter inhabits, the one built on secrets and silence, that's exactly what happens. When you line up their skills, morals, and tactics, the contrast is almost poetic. If there's a moral here, it's this. Brains and planning outpace brute force almost every time. Dexter wins not because he's better, but because he's designed to. Doakes loses not because he's weaker, but because he still believed playing fair could stop evil. And in Dexter's world, playing fair is the fastest way to lose. What do you think? Could Doakes have ever truly beaten Dexter if things had gone differently, or was his fate sealed the moment he saw through the mask? Drop your take in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives and theory breakdowns. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.